Hello everybody and welcome back to Transformedpod. Today you are with your co-host Heather and we're going to deep dive into an incredibly important topic that touches millions of lives. So this is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and complex PTSD, or other known as CPTSD. So whether you've heard about these conditions in passing or you're looking to understand them more fully, this episode is going to unpack what they are, how they differ, and what actually happens to the brain when somebody experiences trauma. So we're going to be exploring the roles of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the neocortex, three parts of the brain that are key to understanding trauma and how they interact to process, store, and sometimes distort traumatic memories. Plus, we'll talk about what the road to healing can look like for those living with PTSD and CPTSD. So let's start with PTSD. So PTSD is a mental health condition that can develop after a person has experienced or witnessed a terrifying or life-threatening event. So this can be anything from war, physical or sexual assault, serious accidents, or natural disasters. But here's the thing, trauma doesn't have to be just one horrific event. It's about how our bodies and brains respond to the overwhelming stress. When someone develops PTSD, they often feel like the trauma hasn't fully ended. It lingers even when they are physically safe. The traumatic event leaves a lasting imprint on the brain. This causes the person to feel that they are in danger, and this is where symptoms like flashbacks, nightmares, and intrusive thoughts come into play. So I'll break those down. So flashbacks can make us feel as though the person is reliving the trauma. So this isn't just a vivid memory, it's as if the trauma is happening all over again in real time. And intrusive thoughts are those relentless memories that pop into the person's mind, and this is often completely uninvited. It's just bringing back distressing feelings. Alongside this, PTSD sufferers may go to great lengths to avoid anything that reminds them of the trauma. So this could be avoiding certain places, people, or even entire emotions. So another impact of PTSD is hyperarousal. So imagine constantly feeling like you're on high alert, as if something bad is going to happen to you at any moment. Your body's tense, you're easily startled, and it's hard to relax. So this can lead to irritability, difficulty sleeping, and concentration problems. So while PTSD is often associated with single or short-term traumatic events, complex PTSD, known as CPTSD, it's different in that it results from long-term chronic trauma. So this often occurs in childhood and usually involves repeated and prolonged abuse or neglect. So this could be things like domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, captivity, or being in a war zone for extended periods of time. So with CPTSD, the symptoms go beyond those of PTSD. Not only does the person struggling with reliving the trauma, but their entire self-image and worldview are shaped by the experience. So this can include feelings of deep shame or guilt, a persistent sense of worthlessness, and chronic mistrust in relationships. So think of it this way, CPTSD doesn't just leave scars, it fundamentally alters how somebody sees themselves and the world around them. So in CPTSD, individuals may experience emotional dysregulation. This means that they can have intense emotions that feel impossible to control. So this can lead to explosive anger, overwhelming sadness, or numbness. And they might even feel trapped in these emotional states for long periods of time. So another hallmark of CPTSD is relational difficulties. So after enduring trauma at the hands of somebody else, especially somebody who was supposed to be trusted, forming healthy relationships can become extremely difficult. There's a fear of betrayal, of being hurt again, and a deeply ingrained sense that they're unworthy of love or care. So this distinction is important. So PTSD focuses on trauma's effects after isolated events, whereas CPTSD recognises how long-term trauma can shape a person's entire sense of self. So it's not just the reactions to certain memories. So to truly understand PTSD and CPTSD, we need to look what's happening inside the brain when trauma occurs. So 3 major areas of the brain play a role in how we process and remember traumatic events. So the amygdala, the hippocampus and the neocortex, each of these have a different job, and together they help explain why trauma has such a profound impact on us. So I'm going to start off with the amygdala. So this small almond-shaped structure deep inside of the brain is responsible for detecting threats and triggering our fight or flight response. So think of it as your brain's alarm system. So when you encounter something dangerous like a bear in the wild, the amygdala sends out a signal like danger, danger, act now. It's what gets your heart pumping, your muscles ready for action, and your body's primed to either fight or flee. During a traumatic event, the amygdala becomes hyperactive and it keeps firing, so trying to protect you from danger. This is helpful when you're actually in danger, but after the event is over, the amygdala doesn't always calm down. In PTSD and CPTSD, the amygdala remains overactive, constantly scanning for threats, even when none are present. This is why people with these conditions often feel like they're still in danger. And this can happen long after the trauma has ended. So it's like having a smoke alarm that goes off at the slightest hint of heat, whether there's a real fire or not. So next we have the hippocampus. So this part of the brain is responsible for memory and learning. In normal situations, the hippocampus helps to catalogue and store memories in an orderly way. It organises events in a timeline, so you know what happened first, second, and so on. Now, this is how we can reflect on past events and understand that they belong in the past. But during a traumatic event, the hippocampus gets overwhelmed. The intense stress and the flood of stress hormones like cortisol disrupt the normal functioning. So instead of neatly organising the traumatic event and filing it away, the hippocampus struggles. So the memory becomes fragmented and the timeline then gets messed up. So this is why in PTSD and CPTSD, memories of trauma don't always feel like memories. They feel like flashbacks. Pieces of the event can come back out of nowhere, triggered by the smallest thing, which, like I said earlier, a sound, a smell, a situation. And because the hippocampus didn't fully process the trauma, it's as if the event is stuck in the present rather than being filed away in the past where it belongs. And oftentimes when memories are, stored away in the past, even if they were quite traumatic or bad memories, we can kind of look at them objectively, but because they feel very present, this is where, these feelings that we are having come from. So lastly, we have the neocortex. And this is also known as the thinking part of the brain. So the neocortex is responsible for higher level thinking, decision making and rationalising. It's the part of your brain that tells you, okay, that was scary, but we're safe now, it's over. And this is what I was saying before, that rationalisation of things. But here's the problem. In PTSD and CPTSD, the connection between the neocortex and the emotional brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, it isn't working properly. So even if someone logically knows that they're safe, their emotional brain doesn't agree. So it's almost like the amygdala and the hippocampus are overriding the neocortex's attempts to calm things down. So this creates kind of a disconnect between that someone knows what they feel, and you might know the trauma is in the past, but it doesn't feel that way. So the trauma is still living in your emotional brain, and the neocortex really struggles to gain control. So let's talk about the nature of traumatic memories themselves. So typically when we remember something non-traumatic, the memory is integrated, it's connected to other memories, other emotions, and we know it's in the past. But with trauma, memories don't get integrated in the same way. Instead, they get stored in a fragmented, disorganized manner. So in PTSD and CPTSD, the brain is unable to process trauma completely. So this is why memories can feel stuck. So instead of being placed in long-term memory, traumatic memories can kind of like float around unfiled, and they can be easily triggered by things that remind us of the original trauma. When this happens, the brain reacts as if the trauma is happening all over again. So this is why someone might have a flashback or a panic attack when they smell something similar to what, maybe they smelled during the traumatic event. Or why, if they hear like a loud sound, they can transport them back to a battlefield or an abusive environment. So the brain just isn't remembering it, it's also reliving it. So what can be done with PTSD and CPTSD? So there is, recovery, and it is treatable, and therapy is a key component of recovery, especially trauma-focused therapies like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and cognitive behavioural therapy. So these therapies can help the brain to reprocess the trauma in a healthier way, so the memories don't carry that same emotional charge. And another crucial part of healing is helping the brain connect with the present moment. So mindfulness techniques, grounding exercises, and somatic therapies help some people with PTSD and CPTSD. And this can help them become more aware of their bodies and their surroundings in real time, which can sort of reduce that feeling of being trapped in the trauma. Now, it is important to know that recovery is different for everyone, and it does take time, but the more we understand how trauma impacts the brain, the better we can support those who are healing from it. Or, if you are suffering from trauma yourself, it helps you sort of understand what is going on within your brain. So I'm going to wrap up today's episode with that. If you would like any more information, feel free to check out our website, which is Transformed Life Coaching, and we have our Instagram and TikTok, which is also Transformed Life Coaching. Thanks very much. Bye.